Hi, everybody. Today we're talking about the ABCs of behavior and ABC data collection, a tool we use to help us uncover patterns of behavior that can indicate the why behind a behavior of interest. I'll briefly introduce the ABCs, then we'll get into each one a little more in depth. Starting off with A, we have the antecedent, which is the change in the environment that happens before a behavior occurs. This is sometimes referred to as the trigger for a behavior. The B is for behavior. The behavior is what the individual does in response to that trigger or antecedent. Lastly, for C, the consequence is the change in the environment that happens as a result of that behavior. So the consequence is going to be really important for us to identify, as this plays a role in what decreases, maintains, or even increases a behavior in the future. So antecedents can actually include a lot of different things. So here's a few examples. Something that causes someone to do something, like a signal. So I'm driving and I see the light turn red. I respond by putting my foot on the brake. So in that situation, the antecedent is the light turning red, and my behavior is putting my foot on the brake. For another example, let's say I'm watching TV and I see a commercial pop up. Then I put the TV on mute. So the antecedent is seeing the commercial, and the behavior is putting the TV on mute with the remote. There can also be events that trigger a behavior. So let's say someone cuts me off in traffic and I respond by honking and cursing at them. The antecedent would be getting cut off in traffic, and the behavior is honking and cursing. For another example, let's say we have a learner that hears someone make a really loud noise, and they respond by pulling that person's hair. The antecedent would be someone making the loud noise, and the behavior would be pulling their hair. Environmental conditions, or changes in these conditions, can also trigger behaviors. This can even be as simple as a change in the weather. So let's say it starts raining outside and I'm caught in the rain. I might respond by getting out an umbrella. In this case, the antecedent is the rain, and the behavior is getting out the umbrella. Environmental conditions can also include the presence or absence of other people. So let's say I notice at daycare that mom is here to pick me up. I might respond by running and hiding because I want to stay at daycare extra long. There's also the availability or the unavailability of reinforcement to consider. So this condition can also include, do I have access to the things that I want? Was there a change in the environment that led to me not getting access to the things that I want? So one of the main reasons we look at antecedents is to look at the events that happen before a person does a behavior or something that we don't like. Patterns of antecedents can help us identify the conditions that the behavior we don't want to see is most likely to occur. So these events that can trigger these interfering behaviors or behaviors we don't want to see can include asking them to do something or telling them to do something that they don't like and don't want to do. A person finding out that they can't have something that they really want or that maybe they're even just expecting. Not having anything to do when they are alone, so being bored or not having any leisure activities. Or a person's in a social setting with other people and they're not getting the attention that they want from that situation. So kicking it on over down to B for behavior, what does the behavior look like when the individual, quote unquote, acts out? So when we're describing and defining behaviors, we want to be objective and describe the observable part of the behavior. So only the stuff that we can actually see. It should also be measurable. So we want to know, how long did the behavior occur? How many times did it happen within that little time frame? Or how much force or magnitude? So if somebody punches you, is it soft enough to make a light tap, or is it forceful enough to leave a big bruise? Behavior should also be written in a way that anyone who, one, reads the description can picture the behavior in their head and they understand exactly what you're talking about, even if it's written on paper. And two, anyone else who sees that same behavior in the future is able to identify whether it's happening or not happening. So it's really important when we're defining or describing behaviors to not assume feelings, intent, or internal states that we're not actually experiencing ourselves because we're not that individual. The individual may make a statement about how they're feeling, but we can't assume to know how they're feeling or the intent behind their behavior. So, for example, this description, he was angry and he hit his mom, is assuming that the individual is angry, which we can't know for sure, and is ultimately kind of irrelevant for our purpose of decoding the function of this behavior. A better way to describe this behavior would include a description of what hitting looked like and the impact that it had on the environment, including other people. So you might write it like, he hit mom's shoulder with a closed fist 3 times with enough force to leave a bruise. This speaks to the impact that it had to other people, and it gives a little more detail about what hitting actually looked like. So going back to people talking about how they're feeling, behaviors might include an individual making statements about how they feel. So in this example, an individual might say, I'm so angry, I want to kill you. So this behavior might be described as the individual stated he was angry and made a threat to kill his sister. Now we're finally at C for consequence. The consequence of a behavior refers to what happens after the behavior occurs. These are some things to think about when describing the consequence of a behavior. Did the learner get access to what they wanted? Did someone back off from a demand that was placed or an instruction? Did something aversive or unpleasant to the individual stop or get removed? Did others respond by providing a reprimand or attention and reassurance? Finding a pattern in the events that happened after the behavior will further strengthen our theory on the why of the behavior. Note that consequence in this context doesn't necessarily mean punishment. It can be anything that happens after a behavior. If the consequence is a punishment, we're going to want to describe exactly what that looked like. Let's go back to some examples from before to focus on the consequences. The light turning red is the antecedent, putting my foot on the brake is the behavior, and the car stopping is the consequence. If I see a commercial, I put the TV on mute, and the consequence is the TV screen is silent and I don't hear the commercial anymore. If I get cut off in traffic and I respond by honking and cursing, what do you think the consequence might be? The car that cut me off might honk back. Let's look at an example of using the ABC flowchart. You're going to see a video of a child having a tantrum in preschool, and we're going to break down the incident using the ABCs. Keep in mind what you think the trigger was, how we're going to define a tantrum, and how the teacher responded to his behavior.
We don't have some more. Don't forget you left those things out there. Yeah, throw it in the trash can. I don't have any more peaches. Sit down. Look at me. These are dirty. I don't have any more peaches. Would you like some banana?
Zachary, Brianna, and Wyatt go wash
That's all
hands.
there is. I'm sorry, Joshua. I didn't throw them on the floor. They're dirty. No, Josh, they're dirty. Now you eat your peaches. It's okay, Brittany. Joshua, would you like to get up and have a banana? Miss Leslie, since you're here, Josh and I will go in the other room.
Huh? Oh, they don't go
You
inside.
take mine.
Sarah,
I'll take
I'll
it.
take them to the shed. They don't.
Okay.
Because mine.
Joshua, you want to get up and have a banana, or do you want to go back to the classroom? Okay, we're going back Joshua, that really hurt.
What do you think the antecedent for this behavior was? Write this down on your practice data sheet under A for antecedent. You should have written something like, the teacher took away the dirty peaches after they fell on the floor. The teacher did have an alternative choice available of bananas, but note that she stated that there are no more peaches left. Now let's define the behavior. Describe what the tantrum looked like in all of its forms, and note its magnitude and force. You might define this tantrum as flopping to the floor, crying, screaming, hitting, kicking, and throwing toys hard enough to hurt the teacher. Now let's look at the consequence. How did the teacher react to the tantrum? What impact did it have on the environment? You should have said something like, the teacher removed him from the room, carried him into the playroom, stated that hurts when he threw the toy at her, and removed toys from the area. Let's look at another example. You're going to see a video of a child exhibiting disruptive behavior. Keep in mind who is in the setting environment, how we're going to define disruptive behavior, and how the teacher and other students responded to this behavior.
Where did the Boston Tea Party occur?
Boston, Massachusetts.
Very good, very good. Okay. Let's see. Who were the Axis powers in World War II?
The Nazis and the Italians.
And? No, they were not part of the Axis.
The Japanese.
Hey, Dan, pay attention. Okay, this is going to be on the test. All right, very good. Who were the Allies in World War II?
England, France.
Good.
Americans.
Okay. Any more? A few more.
French.
Yeah, we did French.
Oh,
Yes.
Burmese.
No. Think north of us. Hey, Dan! Stop that! Don't be disruptive. Canadian, yes, very good. All right, and what about Vietnam?
It was the Americans and the
Hey, Dan, sit down. I'm tired of this disruptive behavior.
What do you think the antecedent was in this scenario? You should have said something like, the teacher asked the class history review questions. We don't know enough about Dan personally to make this assumption, but if it's known that Dan hates American history, we might note that the teacher was presenting questions on a non-preferred topic. How would you describe Dan's disruptive behavior in all of its forms? You should have included some details like touching other students, leaving his seat, yelling out, dancing, moving to the front of the class, or throwing his materials on the floor. Now let's look at the consequence. How did the teacher and classmates respond to Dan's disruptive behavior? You should have included some details like the teacher responded with verbal reprimands, yelling, and instructions to sit down. He also physically stopped him from running by putting his hand on Dan's chest. You might even note classmates responded by smiling and laughing.